Hello, I'm Cliff Pryor, CEO of the Global Steering Group, and it's my absolute pleasure to introduce and to interview Darren Walker. Darren is president of the Ford Foundation, a board member of the GSG itself, amongst many other organizations. He's an exceptional innovator, as you're going to hear, an outstanding leader of the impact movement, and in all his work, he demonstrates values which are both profound and humane. Darren was one of the first children to benefit from the USA's Head Start program, and he said that it gave him an understanding of the need for investment in human capital, making a difference in people's lives. So Darren, welcome.
Thank you, Cliff. I'm delighted to be here.
So COVID, the Black Lives Matter movement, in many ways we are shining a light on inequalities, injustices, some people left behind, others sharing in prosperity. How do you think the impact movement can best help achieve social and economic justice?
Well, first, Cliff, I think it is important to acknowledge the moment we are living through. In the United States, we are having a racial reckoning in a way in which we have never had conversations about race before, that has been sadly, regrettably, generated by the murder of an American citizen on the streets of a major American city, George Floyd, killed by an officer whose responsibility it is to protect the citizens of the country. So that horrific experience has ripped the Band-Aid off the level of systemic racism that we have, and indeed has generated a global conversation about race and class and caste, and the ways in which white supremacy has infected too much of societies all around the world. This is not to say that here in the United States, we don't have a history that we should be proud of, because we have a remarkable history, and this country is a unique country. But we also have some dark strands of that history that we are now, for the first time as a nation, beginning to excavate fully and honestly. The impact movement is critical to this conversation because capital is an intrinsic part of this conversation, and how capital moves, who benefits from it, what investment looks like, where it is directed, the degree to which there is a social dimension to that investment will be critical to moving us forward. And so I believe that impact capital is going to be a critical part of this conversation. And I think we're beginning to see how the movement is indeed a movement not only for impact, but for more justice and fairness and equality.
Thank you. I think that's very true in many ways. As you say, this is global. I'm from the UK, and we have our own issues, our own history to make up, and also, as you say, yeah, this is the driver for change. Impact is nothing if it doesn't have that social justice as well as economic justice in it. Now, you've shown commitment, deep commitment, to helping the most vulnerable by raising $1 billion of debt to fund nonprofits at a time of heightened social need. So tell us a bit about that, and whether you feel this is a philanthropic movement that's following your lead, or is it you alone in Ford?
Well, the Ford Foundation is like many legacy foundations, Rockefeller, Carnegie, MacArthur, et cetera. We live off an endowment. We live off of the proceeds that come from our investments. And the reality is that when times are bad, when we are in a situation of economic stress, is usually when we have less money to give away. And that's actually when need goes up. So there is this asymmetry historically. We saw it in 2008 in the United States when giving actually went down because the markets went down, but need went up. And of course, we anticipated and knew this back in March that we were going to be experiencing something we've never experienced in this country. The degree and the depth of deprivation and real economic hardship is of a category we've not experienced in our lifetime. And therefore, for a foundation like the Ford Foundation to do business as usual, which means paying out 5 to 6% on average, is not acceptable. What I said to my terrific trustees, the Ford board, has been just magical and courageous in their willingness to really step out, was that it's not defensible for a foundation like Ford to pay out 5 or 6%, and that we had to pay out more. The challenge was this conversation was going on in March and April at a moment when we lost $2 billion of our endowment, and the investment managers were saying now is not the time to begin to liquidate. Now's the time to stabilize. We're going to need liquidity and all of the things that investment folks talk about. So I had to come up with an alternative, and really what came out of just some thinking about the markets and where, as a result of Fed policy, interest rates was why not issue debt? I know foundations don't do that, but these are not normative times, and we need non-normative thinking. So for me, this was a pretty straightforward idea. The board got excited about it. I was able to work with the presidents of Mellon, Duke, MacArthur, and Kellogg. Ford put up $1 billion that would basically increase our grant making from 550 or 600 to 1.1 billion for 2 years. So that $1 billion gave us almost 100% of additional payout. The other 4 foundations put in $800 million of increased giving for their institutions. And so it's an exciting proposition, and it was a really, I think, example of philanthropy collaborating at its best. I don't know if this is going to be about a movement. I would not be so immodest to suggest that, but I do know that there are other foundations who are both making commitments to pay out more and also looking at the capital markets as a mechanism for that.
Fantastic. And so, yes, you have brought other foundations into this and inspired them to do it. And also something that I hadn't heard before, that it's over 2 years. So you can pick up both the immediate liquidity crisis and some of the recovery as those organizations build out from the crisis. That's really great to hear. So another area, and as you know, the GSG is pushing very hard for to reflect in companies' accounts the cost of insufficient diversity in their workforce, alongside other social and economic costs, and as part of a wider impact transparency. So on that area of insufficient diversity in the workforce, would you see that as a game changer?
Well, I certainly think what the GSG is doing is pioneering. It's bold, and it's needed and necessary. We know from the research that diverse organizations are more likely to be successful organizations. They are more profitable. Staff surveys reflect that they are happier and more satisfied with their jobs and with their institutions. And so this is a critical imperative. And I think we have to work with particularly the asset managers, the BlackRocks of the world, to incorporate these kinds of metrics and to acknowledge that diversity is an asset and that there is a negative drain on or drag on the company if it is not diverse, and that we need to calculate what the cost of lack of diversity is.
Many people say that this is a time for a system change, a total system change. And they're probably right, but people also need influential but tangible initiatives which they can grasp, they can take action on. So finally, perhaps to share with the participants here, if you had one priority, one action that you would recommend to help achieve a just and impact-led recovery from this crisis, what would that be?
I think we need a fundamental conversation about the allocation of capital. Average workers, average citizens feel marginalized in their own economies, in their own societies, by elites who spend lots of time at think tanks and global gatherings of other elites. And that does not translate into tangible, meaningful improvements in their lives. If we don't deal with this issue, we in the future are going to have the issue of inequality and the issue of climate change put us on a trajectory, the implications of which I really can't even fully consider.
Mm-hmm. So a move from shareholder to stakeholder.
We must move from shareholder to stakeholder. The stakeholder paradigm must be our future. That has to be the North Star. I believe as we approach the 50th anniversary of Milton Friedman's letter that was published in the New York Times in September of 1970, we need to reflect on the damage that has been done by an ideology that provided the intellectual scaffolding for 4 decades of stagnation and a sense of being left behind by most workers. And where elites like myself and those with assets who have the ability to invest and to be in the markets continue, whether markets are good or bad, or whether things are good or bad. There is something wrong in the middle of a pandemic when billions of people are hurting, that those of us who have been invested in the stock markets, certainly in the United States, are actually better off than we were at the beginning of this pandemic. There is something fundamentally wrong, and we must excavate and examine and reflect on that injustice.
That's a call to action if ever there was. Darren, thank you. Truly outstanding, profound, as I said it would. And I'm sure that everyone in this virtual hall will have been both inspired and spurred to action from your words. Thank you.
Thank you, Cliff. This has been a great honor.